All right, thanks, Gary. Good to see everybody. I had several days out in Colorado, which is my home away from home. And I was down in southwest Colorado, kind of in Ridgeway, Colorado, which is about 15 minutes from your way, about 30 minutes from Telluride, kind of in the San Juans and the Cimarrons. It's just a beautiful area. I was driving back Friday, and I didn't get home till about 11 p.m., so the last 3.5 hours of my drive, I was listening to the Kansas City Chiefs game happening in Brazil. Anybody watch that game? Did anybody have any negative emotions during the game? I want to talk a little bit about negative emotions today. Any of you have any negative emotions? You know, it's one thing to have some negative emotions about a Chiefs game. It's another thing if you go through deep levels of trauma or darkness where negative emotions can seem to just stream into your life on a very, very regular basis. And so I want to talk about this. You know, I grew up in an era that had a strategy for negative emotions, and that was basically that you tried to battle them or deny them or defeat them or maybe even numb them. But we didn't really have a great strategy for how to do anything with them other than try to beat them up and get them out of my life, resist them kind of a thing. I grew up in a home where, if you're going to cry, my dad's not here. He hurt his wrist pulling weeds, hasn't been able to sleep for 2 nights, and so mom's taken him to the emergency care this morning, like urgent care. And the first thought that came to my mind was, Dad, if you're going to cry, I'm going to get, no. Didn't do that, just a joke. But no, I heard that growing up as a kid. If you're going to cry, I'm going to give you something to cry about, right? And so I remember the movie that came out called A League of Their Own, where Tom Hanks is coaching a female baseball team. And the most famous line from that movie is, right? You know it, right? Crying? There's no crying in baseball. So that era, and what's interesting is if you trace back how to deal with negative emotions, even to say some of the most famous Greek philosophers, Aristotle and Xenocrates and Plato, they many times saw negative emotions as being demonic. So if you feel sadness or fear or any other number of negative emotions, shame or something like that, then it's a direct result of demonic activity in your life. Isn't that interesting? So I think there's a whole, not just generation, but centuries of people who have thought that the best way to deal with negative emotions is to try to numb them, avoid them, get them out of your life, kick them, battle them, resist them, all that kind of stuff. There's a famous song that came out in a movie called Modern Times. It was a Charlie Chaplin movie, black and white movie, before there were color movies. And Charlie Chaplin actually wrote the score to this song, and then a couple other people wrote the lyrics, but then people like Nat King Cole made it famous. And it's called Smile. It's a song called Smile. Listen to these words. Smile though your heart is aching. Smile even though it's breaking. When there are clouds in the sky, you'll get by if you smile through your fear and sorrow. Smile, and maybe tomorrow you'll see the sun come shining through for you. Lift up your face with gladness, hide every trace of sadness. Although a tear may be ever so near, that's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you'll just smile. And actually, church culture kind of works that way sometimes too. You come to church and you put on a smile. And if somebody asks you if you're doing all right, you just say, I'm doing great. Everything's great. And you put on a smile. Well, let's talk a little bit about negative emotions and how to deal with them in a healthy way. And by the way, the ancient wisdom of the Greeks isn't the only ancient wisdom that's out there. There's actually some ancient wisdom in the Bible. Imagine that. And in the Bible, particularly the Hebrew Bible, there's this tradition of dealing with negative emotions through what we call lament. Lament. If you were to read all 150 of the Psalms in the Bible, you would find out that a good third to almost half of the Psalms, so like 70 of the Psalms, are Psalms of lament, where the psalmist is literally just pouring out negative emotions onto the page in poetry. And if you think about some of the great songs that have been written in the world through the centuries, some of them are sad songs, right? How many breakup songs have you ever heard in your life? And then you just kind of write your emotions out, or people write their emotions out through poetry and song, and they sing about that. Well, this is a great, important tradition called lament. Job, the book of Job, huge chapters of Job are all about lament, being honest about your negative emotions. Neuroscience now has shown us that negative emotions are important to process in an honest and healthy way. In fact, they backfire on you if you try to suppress them, deny them, or numb them. And I've used in here many times the analogy of pushing a beach ball underwater, trying to hold it there indefinitely, right? And eventually you wear out and it comes flying up out of the water. And so when we suppress negative emotions, those emotions are actually trying to tell us something. They're important, and it's okay to express those negative emotions through poetry, through song, through friendships, through honest conversations, through therapy. What we're going to learn is it's actually very important to process negative emotions in a healthy way. Now, Pastor Greg did a great message last weekend. Thank you so much for that message, Greg, on chapter 28 of Job. And I just love that message that you delivered. And as we look at Job, right after that chapter, Job goes into several chapters, chapter 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 30. There's a bunch of chapters there where Job is expressing lament. He's just pouring out his negative emotions on the page. One of the first things that Job does after his friends have weighed in, remember his friends, the first one, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, they were the ones that were trying to tell Job that it was his fault that he was suffering. You're reaping what you sow, Job, and so because you're in such a horrible circumstance, it's all your fault. Those are wonderful friends to have, aren't they? Think about this. Job lost what? His 10 children, his wealth, all of his wealth, and his personal health. So, think about finances, key relationships, and your personal health. That is pretty much a slam dunk of suffering and losing everything you can lose. And then you have 3 friends that come and sit with you in silence for 7 days, which was a good thing, but then all of a sudden, the rest of the time they're going, well, Job, guess what? It's all your fault. And God is getting you, And so Job actually is like going, I don't think that's the case. And Job, like in chapter 29 and 30, Job starts saying, I remember the days when God was blessing me and when it felt like everything I was doing was under the blessing of God, and the work that I was doing was prospering, and my kids were prospering, and my cattle and my sheep and all of my wealth was prospering, my physical health was awesome, and I felt great. And I remember those days of blessing where it felt like God was just pouring out streams of blessing. And then he even goes in and he says, and with all the wealth that I obtained, Job lists out all the things that he did with his wealth. It wasn't like he just focused it all on himself. He was somebody who cared for the poor. He mentions that I gave money and helped the poor wherever I saw them. He says, I helped the orphans and supported orphans through my financial resources. Job says, I help the helpless. Job says, I help the stranger, the immigrants, the refugees, and I help the oppressed. I used my resources that I'd been blessed with to be a blessing to people all around me. And Job says, I was a person of integrity. And then I lost everything. Lost it all. And then now all I feel are these streams of negative emotion. And he expresses that. And one of the passages, he says, God, I cried out to you. This is Job 30, verse 20. God, I cried out to you, and you did not answer me. And so there's this place where Job is just pouring out his heart, pouring out his lament, and he's just letting it fly. I want to recommend to you that that's actually a healthy way to handle negative emotions. You need safe places and safe friends to express all of the things that you're feeling. I also want to encourage you that mindful meditation can be really, really good for you too when it comes to dealing with negative emotions, which, by the way, I'll be starting a new class on mindful meditation and yoga starting this Wednesday night here at the church at 6 p.m. And Natalie Lloyd, who will be leading the yoga part of that, is going to be joining as well. So I want to encourage you to come out to that. But as we look at Job, he really defended his lifestyle and his integrity and his love for God and his heart for those that were most vulnerable. Job was a person of great integrity, and then suffering just blasted him. His three friends blamed it on him, and then there was a fourth friend that came in, and we see this in chapter 31, 32. His name was Elihu, and Elihu was a little more subtle than the first three friends. The first three friends blamed Job entirely, but Elihu was kind of like, well, it might not be directly your fault, Job, but God is disciplining you for maybe some sin that you might do in the future. Oh, thanks, God. Or maybe some hidden sin that you're not even aware of. So here's this friend who's like going, yeah, it's still kind of your fault, Job, even though it might not be directly your fault. It might be the fault of something you haven't done yet or something that you're not mindful of. And so God killed your 10 kids, took your wealth, and put boils all over your body. How many of you would view a loving parent like your kid doesn't clean their bedroom? Or maybe they're not going to clean their bedroom 10 days from now. And so to teach them something, you're going to just like wipe everything out. We would look at that kind of parent and go, oh, maybe they need to be locked up, right? So Job's friends, and I love Greg pointed out that we all understand that we do reap what we sow. We put out good, we get back good. We can put out negative, we have consequences, we can get back good, but that's not the whole picture. I love the way Greg phrased that. There's a whole lot more that is going on out there than we're not even in touch with. And the reality is that life happens. I could say it another way. I got children in the room here, and blankety blank happens, right? Oh man, stuff happens. So challenging, so powerful. And as we look out across the world, innocent people suffer all the time in this world. And I think we need to understand that there's a way to view suffering and a way to process it that actually helps us heal from it rather than get destroyed from it. If we try to suppress, numb, battle, push down the most negative emotions in our life, the chances are those are going to backfire on us and have negative consequences that add to the consequences that we're already dealing with. But if we allow those emotions to happen and express them, what we begin to realize is that in the midst of the negative emotions, there can be healing as we express those negative emotions. In fact, I want to suggest to you, the only way we get through it is to express it, is to be honest about it, is to deal with it, and to deal with it in healthy places. Lament is an important part of healing. Being honest with our negative emotions is an important part of responding to trauma. Therapy, super important. Counseling, super important. Friends who will listen and not give bad advice is incredibly important. A community of people who will walk through the deepest, darkest places with you is incredibly important. We need each other. We can't do this alone. And I think what's fascinating is that all of us through a course of lifetime are going to experience those seasons of blessing where we feel like the universe is smiling on us. And then at the same time, we can experience those seasons of darkness where it feels like the whole universe is frowning on us. We have these feelings, these emotions, these experiences. Psalm 21 is a psalm where God is on the throne and everything's great. God's glory is shining and the universe is smiling. Psalm 21 is a psalm of the thronement of God and everything's working like we hoped it would. Psalm 22, following Psalm 21, is one of the darkest psalms of lament in the Old Testament. Psalms 22 starts out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And then the psalmist quotes Job, "I cried out to you, and you did not answer me." That's Psalms 22, verses 1 and 2, and the psalmist is quoting Job from Job 30, verse 20, where Job said the same thing. "I cried out to you, and you did not answer me." And of course, if you read all four Gospels, when Jesus was hanging on the cross, he had 7 statements, and one of the statements that Jesus quoted from the cross was Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He quoted one of the darkest psalms of lament in the most intense time of suffering that humans can go through. Psalm 21, God's on the throne, the universe is smiling, everything's great. Psalm 22, the universe is frowning and everything is going the opposite direction and negative emotions are streaming. Psalm 23 integrates those two. And it's one of the most powerful psalms, I think, in all of the Bible. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside peaceful water. He restores my strength. He guides me along paths of righteousness, bringing honor to his name. Psalm 21. But then, yea, though I walk through the darkest valley, Psalm 22. Yea, though I walk through the darkest valley, negative emotions streaming. I have fear, but I know, God, that you are with me. The cross tells us that God is not distant or absent from our deepest sorrow, our deepest suffering, but that God, in the person of Jesus Christ, enters into our suffering, walks through the suffering, and is present with us even when we don't feel God's presence. God is present with us. In my own personal darkness that I had a few years ago, I didn't feel God's presence glowing upon me like I had for so many years. Instead, I felt absence of God's presence. And when I tried to hear God, it felt like silence. So the two things I felt were in the darkest days were absence of God's presence and silence of God's voice. This is what Job is experiencing here. But the crazy thing was, for me, when I was streaming with questions and doubts and all of that, when I would sit in a group of people who would get real and honest about their negative emotions and what they were struggling with, I found that I identified with this person here and this person here and this person here, and that the gift of vulnerability and honesty about what people were going through actually was where I heard the voice of God. And another person sharing that pain with me, I would go, oh my gosh, I'm not alone in this human experience of pain and suffering, even when we're full of integrity, or even when we're not. We have this moment to be honest with one another, and in our human vulnerability, God moves and God works. Neuroscience tells us that one of the best ways to deal with negative emotions is a little acronym called RAIN, R-A-I-N. R stands for recognize. Studies show when it comes to emotions that just naming emotions is actually an important step to healing. You look at the feeling wheel. Any ever heard of the feeling wheel? There's not just 4 emotions, sad, mad, glad, or 3 emotions, but there's dozens of emotions. And the better we learn to identify our emotions, Mark Brackett wrote a beautiful book called Permission to Feel. Just naming the emotion that we're dealing with is the first step toward dealing with it in a healthy way. Recognize it. Then you actually allow it. You sit down with it. You dive into it. I'm feeling this. You give voice to what you're feeling. You pour it out through song or journaling or however you want to do that, or with a friend or with a therapist. And as you pour that emotion out with other people, you're going to find that you're not alone in it. And that not being alone is so critically important, because that's where we find the strength from other human beings to begin to process in a healthy way. Then we begin to investigate it. What am I fearing? Why am I sad? What's going on here? And we nurture it. That's the N, R-A-I-N. Recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And you nurture it not with criticalness. How many of you, when you have a negative emotion, get more critical towards yourself and beat yourself up? You know, think about it. You know, we have a negative emotion, stuff is going bad, and then we feel these emotions, and then we beat ourselves up for having a negative emotion. Well, I should be stronger than this. I should be better. I shouldn't be crying. We don't cry in baseball. And we have all these thoughts that go through, and we beat ourselves up for dealing with honest emotions because they're negative and we don't want them. That kind of inner critic or self-judgment is actually a very unloving thing. In fact, it's very much like Job's friends who are blaming Job. Your own thoughts can be blaming you just like Job's friends blamed him. And it's not a very loving way to treat ourselves. In fact, in nurturing negative emotions, what we begin to realize is that we have an openness, a curiosity, a non-judgment, and a compassion toward ourselves that we need to have toward other people who are going through those same kind of experiences. And that kind of self-compassion toward ourselves actually nurtures a deep love for ourselves that is the heart of God in our suffering, which we see in the person of Jesus through his suffering on the cross. So it's okay to cry. It's okay to lament. In fact, it's healthy and it's good. And what we've learned is that people who even experience the deepest of trauma, if they process these emotions in the healthy way, there's something we've now realized called post-traumatic growth. We have military people in our congregation who have gone through trauma of various types, and we've had people in our congregation who have gone through different kinds of emotional trauma and physical trauma. And one of the things that we learn about trauma is that if we process it in a healthy way, that there begins to be and emerge a resurrection of sorts, an opportunity, a new horizon, a new birth, a new hope out of the darkness. And this is how humans have been handling suffering for eons. Suffering, if we handle it right, brings resilience in the human being. And that resilience begins to navigate a post-traumatic world with new hope, with new opportunities, with new love, with a new appreciation of life, and with a new hope that percolates even in the darkest of places. This is what we have an opportunity to experience even in the darkest of moments. Richard Rohr says this: if we do not transform pain, we will most assuredly transmit it. So if we do not transform pain, we will most assuredly transmit it usually to those closest to us, our family, our neighbors, our coworkers, and invariably the most vulnerable, our children. So our challenge today is to walk out our negative emotions, to be honest with them, to find safe places to share and process so that we're not alone. And we realize that God's love is not controlling and dominating and dishing out punishments for things we never even conceived of, but that God's love is present with us in the deepest, darkest places. And the crucifixion of Jesus points to the heart of God, suffering with us in these places of darkness. The love of God, uncontrolling love of God, walking through these places of darkness with us.